Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry for the delay in starting. Can you see the screen? Yes. So, yes, I hope you can see. Okay, so today's session is about
Recording in
analyzing
progress.
qualitative data. So if you're doing a research that deals with qualitative data collection, that means, say, you plan to do some interviews or you plan to do a review of documents. So any type of qualitative data you're thinking of collecting, then how to deal with that type of data, how to analyze that type of data. So we'll look at some of these available data analysis techniques that we can use to analyze qualitative data. And mainly, we'll go through this particular technique that's commonly used for analyzing this type of data, which is known as thematic analysis. Right? So our focus is now today is on qualitative data rather than numbers. So as I was saying, so if any of you are planning on conducting interviews, then you will have interview transcripts to analyze, or if you're doing any observation sessions, doing observations for your data collection, or you want to analyze content of, say, any articles, any documents, newspapers, websites, policy documents. So any of those types of qualitative data, then how to analyze these data. So these are some of the available data analysis methods that we can use to analyze this type of data. So we have this quantitative content analysis techniques, thematic analysis. So these two will have a look at in a bit more detail in the coming slides. So other than that, there are, of course, these other types of qualitative data analysis methods as well. So you might come across phrases like narrative analysis, where you are, say, if you're conducting a biographical type of research, maybe, so you try to understand a series of events in the order that they happened, in the progression that they happened. So you're trying to kind of tell a story or a narrative about the event or the life that you're analyzing. So, and then there are things like discourse analysis, where you're trying to analyze, say, naturally occurring patterns of talk and, say, language in text. And then there's grounded theory, where you're trying to build up a proper explanation or a theory which is grounded in or which is based on your collected data. So rather than, say, something that's framed by literature or something that's informed by literature, building a theory from the collected data itself. So, see, those things we will not be going into that much detail today, but as I was saying, the first two data analysis methods, which may be quite commonly used in most of your type of qualitative research, we'll discuss in a bit more detail. So starting with quantitative content analysis. What do we mean by quantitative content analysis? So it's a very simple technique And what you want to do here is try and objectively and systematically count and record certain things. So you're trying to come up with a numerical description of the content within a particular text. So sometimes because of this, people refer to this data analysis technique as a quantitative analysis of qualitative data as well. So simply what you're trying to do here is trying to count how many times a particular word or a particular phrase is occurring within the text that you're analyzing. So you're trying to get a frequency of occurrence. So your basic assumption here is that, say, if a certain phrase or a certain word is occurring a lot of times, many times, if the frequency is high, that would indicate that the importance or the significance of that particular phrase or the word is quite high as well. And by doing this, we can get an idea as to whether a particular topic, a particular idea is how common or how prevalent that topic is in the documents that we are analyzing. So you might analyze a policy document, say policy documents in different countries, let's say, and you want to check and see how they address the issue of climate change. So if you simply do a word count of these policy documents that you have collected, and you count how many times the phrase climate change is appearing in each of these documents. And you can see in the Sri Lankan documents, it's coming up 10 times. In the UK, it's mentioned 50 times. So you get an idea, okay. So there's a higher importance might have been placed on this particular topic in that country. It's mentioned frequently. And you can also use this type of analysis to explore and see, say, how certain words are used and in what context certain words are used. So, for example, say do certain demographics or certain, say, sectors in the economy. How do they talk about climate change? So, for instance, we can say if you are conducting some interviews with different sectors in the economy, so you might check and see, okay, what are the most common words that farmers use when they talk about climate change. So do they mention rain? Do they mention floods or temperatures going up, or like what kind of words are they using? So you can get an idea of what are the most commonly occurring ideas or topics by just simply doing a word counting technique like this. So, but there are certain challenges that we have to keep in mind when we are doing this type of quantitative content analysis. So, one obvious challenge we have is dealing with synonyms and homonyms. So, synonyms means, say, the same idea, you might use different words but you're still talking about the same item. So even climate change, say different word, different people might have used different phrases or terminology to talk about that same issue. Say somebody might have mentioned about temperature increases. And then homonyms means it is the same word, you have the same spelling, the same pronunciation, but the meanings are different. Say, for example, if you consider the word mine, M-I-N-E, how many different usages can there be? So it might mean a mine like this, where you mine for, say, minerals or any other um, uh, precious resources. Or it can even mean a mine like this, a land mine, for instance. Or it can even mean belonging to me, it's mine. So if you just simply do automatic counting of how many times the word mine is occurring, and it has been used by, say, used in different places to mean different things, then you might end up with a wrong conclusion. So it might have occurred 25 times, but all 25 times not in the same meaning. So you might end up with a correct counting of the number of times the word is occurring, but not the actual meaning of each usage. So is that clear? So that's a very simple technique that you can use to analyze qualitative data to give, say, some kind of indication about how frequent or how important a particular topic or idea is within the content that you're analyzing. Okay, so then we can move on to the main technique we are discussing today, which is thematic analysis. So what do we mean by thematic analysis? So this is, say, in qualitative data analysis, this is used commonly as an umbrella term to basically mean any method of data analysis that where you try to identify, analyze, and report patterns that you can observe within your data. So what you want to try and do at the end of the day is to try and come up with a theoretical explanation of the phenomenon that you're studying. So this is a very widely used qualitative data analysis technique, and sometimes people even refer to this as qualitative content analysis. So the previous one was quantitative content analysis, where you basically try to count the frequency of occurrence. And here, this is a more qualitative method of analyzing qualitative data, so known as a qualitative content analysis technique. So this is the basic process that we have to follow when we are doing a thematic analysis. So we'll go through each of these steps one by one. So starting with preparing our data for the analysis. So say when you collect qualitative data, let's say you might have conducted some interviews. So now your collected data, it's in the spoken word format. They tell you the answer, they talk. So you might have recorded the interview with your interviewee's permission. And now the first thing we have to do when we try to think about our analysis is to try and convert this data into a written format. So we have to basically now transcribe our interviews. And these interview transcripts, say you have conducted 10 interviews altogether. So all these transcripts we have to format and say have in the same structure, same order, say the same organization. So that's easy for us to then start our analysis. And of course, these background information, say what type of, say how you selected your respondents, your sampling method, who you talk to, a profile of your participants, say who they are, their experience, background, all those things. You have to mention in your research methodology chapter. Why it's important to do that? Because then that will ensure the transferability of your results. That means, say, somebody else reading your work, reading your findings, will be able to judge whether your findings are applicable to their context as well. Say you might have collected data from 10 interviewees in Sri Lanka. So just by saying that, we don't know who you have talked to, who, like these findings, whose opinions are they, what are their backgrounds, what are their, say, experiences. Do they have the qualifications to talk about the topic that you're investigating? So only by knowing those things, we can judge. Okay, then maybe this information, this is valid for my situation also. See, these findings, they may be applicable to my situation also. Right? So mentioning those information, it's very important. So this transcription process, so transcribing your interviews, will involve converting your audio or video content that you have collected as data to text. So once we have these written texts, written transcripts, we have a readable record of an audio or video recording. So we have a readable record of your collected data. And we can do these transcripts mainly in 3 different ways. We can carry out verbatim transcripts. So verbatim transcription means you try to capture every sound that was made during the interview. Say if your respondent takes a pause, verbal pause, laughs, clears the throat, or say there's a silence. All this information you transcribe. So say depending on the type of research that you're doing, so even those kinds of details can uh, say can be useful to get a full idea of the situation that you analyze. So for example, here you have a verbatim transcript. Say everything, say the moderator or the interviewer says, okay, so say that indicates there's a pause there, so a full stop has been used. I want to focus on, so again, there's a pause there. Obesity rates within individuals. So why do you think people become obese? And then say I think there are a number of reasons. Right? So even those kinds of noises, they are recorded. So then there's a pause, again, that's mentioned, that's recorded. So all the utterances, when there's a cut off in the speech, or I think one so all of those things are recorded. So every noise, every sound made, that's transcribed. So that's known as a verbatim, a word-to-word transcript. So in most of your cases, that level of transcription might not be necessary. So many of you might go for these next two types of transcripts. So after verbatim, we have intelligent verbatim transcripts. So if these background noises, pauses, coughs, those things, if they are not relevant to the purposes of your research, purposes of your transcripts, we can eliminate these things. And we can come up with a more intelligent verbatim transcript. So we are coming up with a more concise, readable transcript. However, we still have everything that's said by the interviewee. So we are not changing any words or any say grammatical mistakes or anything that so we don't say change the sentences or anything like that. It's only those unnecessary, say, background noises, those things we omit. Then the third level is the edited transcript. So here we are taking these intelligent transcripts further by, say, editing out or removing any superfluous content. Say you think, okay, this is not relevant to my research. So he was just talking about something else, some other topic that's not relevant to my topic, so I don't have to transcribe that. So if there are any grammatical mistakes in the way that they talk, so you might correct those things. And if they're using certain slang terms or say that kind of things, you might edit for those things. Any unfinished sentences, you might say complete. So that type of edits are done. So that's known as an edited transcript. So at the end of the day, you might end up with a transcript that looks or that reads more formal than the actual original content. So the original interview is kind of edited to make it a bit more formal. So it is clearer to read, easier to understand. So again, we have to be careful. So it might not always be appropriate. So if you're editing out all the, say, any important information, even the slang terms, they might be relevant to some research topics that you're investigating. So might not always be the best option. So depending on your research needs, you might select to either do an edited transcript or an intelligent verbatim transcript to start your data analysis process. So during the data collection itself, you have to think about properly documenting your collected data analysis, everything in a qualitative research. This will help you to keep track of, say, all of your data. So, say, all the interview transcripts, the recordings, interview transcripts, then the analysis that you do. So everything you have to properly, say, name the documents, save them in correct folders, and keep them organized. Then before you start your proper thematic analysis process, then you have to go through these interview transcripts that you produce and familiarize yourself with it. You have to immerse yourself in the data. So you have to read your data analytically, quite critically, and note any items of interest, any interesting things that you think should be captured during the analysis process, and basically have a thorough idea about the content within those documents. So now in that, we will make it easier then to start your analysis process. So for instance, while you're doing interviews, you can even take down notes. Anything, say, anything important, interesting that you hear during the interview, you can take notes. So even when you're recording the interview, still those important things that come up during the interview for each question, you can just say take down shorthand notes. So when you're analyzing, then you have a starting point. These are key things that came up during the interview. And you know, okay, I need to follow up on this. So they mentioned this, so I need to ask a follow-up question, or I need to like do some more interviews to follow up on this particular topic. So that kind of notes you can make even during the interview, so you don't miss anything. So with that, we'll come to the main part in our thematic analysis process, which is to carry out the coding. So what do we mean by coding here? So simply what that means is we are trying to identify aspects in our data that relate to our research questions. So we are analyzing data to answer our research question. So this coding helps us to locate parts of our data, aspects of our data that will help us to answer our research question. So we are seeing these important moments, important aspects, and we are coding them, giving it a label basically. And this will help us to actually reduce our text into say a set of items, set of codes that will consist of a word or a say set of words, phrases that we can easily focus on. So rather than say 10 pages of an interview transcript, we might end up with a list of codes we can just look at, easily focus on. So this coding is known as the most important act, most significant act in the qualitative analysis process. And we have to do this in a very comprehensive and systematic way in order to capture all the important ideas mentioned by our interviewees. So we can do coding in two different ways. We can do it by hand, manually, or we can use certain software specifically developed for analyzing qualitative data to do this coding process also. So we'll look at both ways how to do coding. So we are not saying that one method is better than the other. So depending on your situation, you might select, okay, whether I'm doing manual coding or am I going to do electronic coding? So if you're doing manual coding, that will mean, say, you might use actual physical tools like papers, pencils, pens, highlighters, note cards, say, hard copies of your transcripts of the documents that you're coding, and you manually code, or you might do it in the computer. So like we will do today. So either using a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet. Whereas if you're using electronic coding, you might use a software like NVivo that is designed to analyze qualitative data. So if you don't have a lot of data that you're analyzing, then manual coding may be quite easy to use because you don't have to use a specialized software. Whereas if you're dealing with a larger data set, you might want to think about using NVivo or another software. So of course, you'll have to familiarize yourself with the software first, watch tutorials, learn the software, familiarize yourself with it. But the advantage there then would be once you start the process, then say organizing your data, doing the coding, revising them, changing anything, say coming up with the patterns, say automatically checking the frequencies, those things would be easier, so more efficient. Whereas if you're trying to do them manually, those things might take time. So you do coding and you say once you have coded 3 interviews, you think, okay, this particular code, I want to change it. I want to change the wording. So you have to go back and manually change everywhere the wording. Whereas in electronic coding, you can easily do. So it will automatically apply that change to every place you have coded. So those are the advantages and disadvantages. So depending on the context, you can select which approach you are going to follow. So how do we do coding? We'll have to read through our text and identify any specific places or say segments of information and try to assign a label or an identifier to describe what that talks about. So by looking at our research question, we will see, okay, this part, it says some aspect that's related to our research question. It talks about something that's related to our research question. So we identify that and we assign it a label, a code that describes what that talks about. We'll have to keep repeating this process until we can identify no new code. So we go through all our data and every aspect of our data that's relevant to answering our research question, we have identified. Right, so we'll look at a small example to understand this a bit further. So here we have an interview transcript. So let's say our research question here is my research question here is what are the barriers to health and safety on construction sites? So that was what my research was. So to answer this research question, then I have done interviews. So this is now one interview transcript I have. This is with my first respondent R1, the date of the interview, time of the interview. This is my now transcript. So INT stands for the interviewer, R1 stands for the respondent 1. So now everything is transcribed. The question and the response. This is my second interview and the transcript of that second interview. So respondent R2, so give the transcript. Now, how do we carry out coding now? So this is my research question. Now I have to go through this transcript and identify aspects that will help me to answer this particular research question. Right? So here, has the management provided adequate support to fulfill safety requirements at site? Please explain. Yes, whatever is required, they provide and support. They make regular visits to observe the condition. But sometimes they don't comply with PPE and bypass the rules. Okay. So here I think, okay, here there's something here that talks about a barrier to health and safety on construction sites. Sometimes they don't comply with PPE and bypass the rules. So I identify that as an important information segment that's relevant to my research question, and I have to now give it a code, a label. So what does this talk about? What is the barrier that's mentioned here? So it's about management, not say following the rules. So I give it a code that describes what that particular segment talks about. Clear? So I have to go through the whole of the transcript and do this. Say here now, especially the attitudes of the people should change to give more consideration for safety. So there's another potential barrier there. Maybe that's talking about poor attitudes of people towards health and safety. Say many laborers don't have knowledge or any training about health and safety. So maybe lack of training. So you to say they're not even fully aware of safety risks associated with the work they do. So maybe I can call it unawareness. So about safety risks. So likewise, have to go through the whole transcript and quote every aspect that's relevant to answering this particular research question. Right? So then you can move on to the next interview transcript and keep going. Now the advantage of, say, doing these codes is, now say when we are doing this coding process, if this same idea, say unawareness about safety risks or lack of training on health and safety, so any of these now labels we have used, if those same ideas come up again, maybe in the same interview or in a different interview, we can use those same labels, same codes. Right? So we say not every person will use the same terminology or same phrases when talking about issues. So the same idea, but they might have said it in different ways, using different words. We can identify those things by doing this coding process. Right? For example, say in this second interview, say if you come to here, say creating positive thoughts or thinking among employees and laborers is very difficult. If we point out any issues, they think it makes problems against them. Again, they are talking about attitudes of people, isn't it? It's poor attitudes of people towards health and safety, maybe. So we can use that same code, then same label. So now we have identified both these respondents. They have talked about this particular issue, this particular barrier. Many of them are not aware about health and safety and the risks. So again, we identified a similar issue in previously also, isn't it? Here, unawareness about safety risks. So here it was mentioned in a different way, but it's the same idea that they're talking about how people are not aware about the risks. So again, now we can assign the same code here then for that particular idea as well. So is that clear? So that's one way of doing the manual coding. The next way is you can use a table like this. So have two columns in a table. So you have the interview transcript on your left-hand side, and the right-hand column, you have your code. So you can highlight. So this is the same interview transcript. So you can highlight the place you want to code. Maybe say, so here I have used font colors. So either you can use it like that, or you can just use the highlight function, highlight in a particular color, and assign it the code. So you can actually color code in this instance. So for different codes, you can use different colors. So when the same code is repeated, you can use the same color. And keep going for the next transcript as well. So both those ways you can do your manual coding. So this is what I said, say now like halfway through, if you decide, okay, this particular code, I am going to change how I have written it. So I'm going to say change the word in. So instead of lack of health and safety training, I'm going to say poor training of workers or something like that. Now, if I want to do that in this manual coding, now I have to like say go to every place I have used this particular code and say manually copy and paste that change. But if you're using say Vivo or a software like that, that's easy to do. So if you just change the code, it will automatically change everywhere. And if I want to uncode, say this one, I'd say, okay, it doesn't go under poor attitudes of people. I want to change that. I'm going to put it under a different code. So all those things we have to spend some time doing if you're doing it by hand. So is that okay about the coding process? So this is the second way, using a table. So both those ways are possible to do your code. So either using the comment function in MS Word or using a table like this, you can carry out your code. Any questions? Okay, then we'll take a short break, 15 minutes break. It's 2:15 now. So if you come back at 2:30, we'll continue from there. Okay.
Recording stopped.
Let's meet back in 15 minutes then. Okay, so welcome back.
Recording in progress.
So that's the basic coding process. Then the next question we have is then, how do we come up with these codes? Now, this can happen in two different ways. We can identify the codes straight from our data set, or we can identify some codes from literature. Or we could use a combination of both those approaches as well. Now, what we did in our example before, we went through our interview transcript, right? And we identified places that mention some important information that's relevant to our research question, and we assigned it a code that described what that particular segment talked about. So that's what we were doing in this particular example. So that's known as inductive coding. That means we have allowed our codes to emerge from our data without any restraints. So we didn't have any prior ideas when we started our coding process as to what these barriers to health and safety should be, what we should look for. So we straight away looked at our data and started identifying the important segments and started coding them with little to no prior expectation. So our codes were straight away coming from our data. So another way we could have done this is, say, if you have done a literature review prior to our data collection, and in the literature, we might have identified certain barriers to health and safety in construction sites from the works of other authors. So in that case, we could have started our analysis with a list of predetermined codes or priori codes. So now we have a potential list of barriers that we have identified from literature. And now we can check to see if any of those barriers have been mentioned in our data. Okay, so lack of awareness about health and safety, or lack of financial allocation for health and safety. So that kind of barriers might have been mentioned in literature. So any similar things, if any similar things have been mentioned in the data also, then we can give it that predetermined codes. So we have a list of priori codes or list of predetermined codes that we can develop based on our research question and say our literature review. And then we can try to match these with our collected data, segments of our collected data. Now, the disadvantage of this particular approach is there's a chance that you can miss any new things that your interviewees may have mentioned. So in the interviews, they were talking about, say, management, say, not following the rules properly on sites. So let's say that was not, we haven't identified that as a barrier from literature. So if we straight away just try to uh, uh, say, just try to match only our predetermined codes with the available data, then we might miss those new things, new ideas that our interviewees may have said. So to address these issues, commonly, say, people use a combination of these two approaches as well. So sometimes known as an abductive approach. So you might start with a list of predetermined codes from your literature review, but you also keep an open mind as to come up with any new inductive codes. So anything that's not matching with your predetermined list of codes, any new things that your interviewees mentioned, you assign them a new code during the analysis. Is that clear? Now, another type of codes that you might come across is known as in vivo codes. Now, in our example, we went through our interview transcripts, we identified information segments, and we assigned codes using our own words to describe those ideas that we found in those information segments. On the other hand, in vivo codes, we use the same terminology, same phrases that is used in the document text as the code also. So, for example, say things like this. Say, provide toolbox talks. So the code also, you use the same terms, providing toolbox talks, or creating positive thoughts for thinking. Same, using the same words that the interviewee has mentioned. So in the voice of the respondent, that's basically what in vivo means. So this type of codes would be useful, especially if there are any special terms that you want to identify. So something like a toolbox talk, general term, or an insider shorthand term, many innovative terms that people use when talking about things. To say capture those things, it might be useful to use this type of in vivo codes sometimes as well. So using the exact words or phrases as appearing in your data. Okay, so that's the coding process. Once you have done your coding, finished your coding, and you can't identify any new codes by going through the data, then the final thing you have to do after that is to collate all your coded data. So what that means is try and bring together all the data you have coded under each code. So for example, under, say, if we go back to our interview transcript. So you take all of these codes, individual codes, and identify all the data now that you have coded under each code. And you try and bring them to one place. See, so management committee, sorry. So you have all of your codes here. So this is your first code. Say, call it C1. Management not following the rule. So what have you coded under that? Okay. All of this I have coded under that. So I can put it under, can remove the, so from R1, this has been coded under the first code. So again, the second code, poor attitudes towards health and safety. Then what has been coded under that? Say, okay, all of this has been coded. This part. And where else? Poor attitudes are coming. So here also, this has been coded under the, sorry, that we already took here. Here, this has been coded under that. From R1. So likewise, what we are trying to do is for each code, try and bring together all the data we have coded under that particular code. We have to do that to all of our codes. So that would be our final step in the coding process. So there are certain tools. So if you are doing manual coding especially, so there are certain tools like and these, say, freely available macros. Say this is one example. So from Doc Tools sample. So it's a Word macro that you can install, and what it does is it extracts all the comments you have made in a Word document to a new document. So as a table, so it exports like this. So say you have a document like this, so where you have done your coding as comments in MS Word. Now, say when collating, we had to copy and paste these individual things by hand, right? So rather than doing that, if you install that macro, it will automatically export these comments and the text that has been captured under that comment also. And it will automatically produce a table like this. So the comment, the page number, and the text that has been put under that comment. And also the author, like who did it, and the date as well. So those options are available to you if you're doing manual coding. So this type of tools can be helpful. And once you have finished your coding process, then you can try and move on to the next step of your coding, a thematic analysis process, which is generating themes. Now, if you consider your codes as the individual bricks or the building blocks of your analysis, then a theme would be like a wall that you build out of these individual bricks. So you put together several individual bricks and come up with a theme. So a theme is like a central organizing concept. It will capture several different ideas, aspects that relate to this one common concept, one common theme. So what we are now trying to do is we are trying to look at our code and the coded data and identify broad patterns, broad themes that we can generate from this data. So this identifying of themes, it's an active process. And what we want to do is try and capture the most important patterns in our data that are relevant to answering our research question. So we have to identify or go through our codes and our collated data related to each code and try to identify any similarities, any overlaps, any codes that are talking about similar things and try to put them together. Put them under a single concept or a topic or an issue that we can categorize them under. So we have several different codes like this. So by looking at our codes, so any similar codes, any similar ideas, now we want to bring them together under different themes, different categories. Right? So in our example, the previous example that we did, so the barriers to health and safety. So by going through the different codes, we have come up with, maybe we can identify, okay, some of these codes, they talk about financial barriers to health and safety. Some of these codes, they talk about managerial barriers. Some of these other codes, they talk about maybe, I don't know, attitudinal barriers to health and safety. So likewise, we might be able to identify common themes that are relevant to several different groups. So this is from an exercise done in a different research methodology module, an activity that they did about the experiences of online learning among postgraduate research students. So these are some of the codes that they had identified from the interviews. We can look at these codes and see, okay, are there any things that are common to several of these codes that we have? Is there any way that we can group these codes together? So this might be one way that you can do that. You can see, okay, there are some codes that talk about benefits of online talking. It's flexibility, cost effective. Then there are some codes that are talking about requirements for effective online learning. And then there are others that talk about challenges to online learning. So now we have identified 3 main themes about online learning experiences of postgraduate students. Okay. Categorize our codes under those 3 main themes. So another way we can identify these themes is sometimes there can be a code itself which you figure out later. It's very large, very complex. So actually we can have this code as a theme and divide certain subcategories under that particular theme. So for example, let's say, rather than identifying these individual codes, you have just coded everything under challenges of online learning. So you just make, okay, every time there's any challenge that's mentioned, you have coded that under challenges of online learning. But then you realize later, okay, there are this is not one thing. This is a very broad code. They talk about different challenges under this category. So okay, you might decide then, okay, the challenges I can have as my theme category, and I can actually identify several subcategories, subcodes under that. So it talks about distractions from family members, difficult to interact with group members, frustrations due to disruptions, lack of social interaction. You can identify those specific things. So depending on, say, if you have done it that way, so if you have one code that's very big, you identify as quite large, you might decide, okay, I can have that as the theme, and I can actually subdivide that into different things. So there are certain challenges when it comes to developing themes as well. So you need to use your judgment in interpreting data and developing themes. So this qualitative analysis process, it depends on your skills, your personal skills as a researcher as well. So that's why we say that qualitative research can be quite subjective. The same analysis, the same interview transcript, the same research question, 3 people can analyze in 3 different ways. So in the exercise that we did, the codes that I came up with might not be the exact codes that you come up with. So you might use your own phrases, your own terminology, you might do the coding in a different way. So we are using our judgment. And in developing these themes, categories also, we have to use our judgment and how we interpret the data. So we have to be very careful that we correctly interpret the ideas that our respondents have mentioned. And we don't say wrongly interpret something. We have to try and end up with a number of themes that are manageable at the end of the day. So if you end up with 15, 20 themes after your analysis, that's not feasible for you to write up. If there are too many concepts, then your analysis chapter will be very long. You won't know where to stop. So you have to try and make it a concise analysis, end up with a manageable number of themes. And at the same time, we have to make sure that the themes, the categories that we come up with, they cover all of the data. Say, for example, in here, after you have developed the themes, if you still have some codes left over, okay, this code, it doesn't belong to any of my 3 themes. That means my themes, they don't cover the data. There are some ideas, some important informations that I have not considered in my final picture, final categories. And that might not be a correct way of analyzing data. So the themes that I developed, there should not be any overlaps between themes. So each theme should be different to one another. And everything you put within one theme, they have to be similar. So what you put within benefits should be only benefits, so similar things. What you put within requirements should only be requirements. Effective online learning. So there can't be a benefit that you have put under requirements also. That means there are overlaps between your themes. So you have to be able to correctly and clearly define what each theme is, what goes on to each theme. There should be clear boundaries, clear differences between your separate themes. So once you come up with a first set of codes, then you have to keep going through those, revising them, refining them, and until you come up with a list of themes that you're happy with. So you might have to keep on, say, merging, rearranging codes, removing things, renaming them, until you end up with a story that truly reflects the ideas communicated in your collected data. And once you are happy with the final set of themes, then you have to check and see how these themes relate to one another, the relationships between these themes. So how can you organize them? Can you organize them laterally, let's say non-hierarchically, or can they be organized in a hierarchical structure? So if you're putting them in a hierarchical structure, say go for mainly 3 levels, maybe not more than that. So you can't force your analysis into a particular structure. So you can only organize and show in this way if that is the best way to present your results. So for example, you might end up with something like this. So say you're doing a research about, say, identifying the aims of sustainable construction. So you do a document review, you look at policy documents and the different aims that have been highlighted in these policy documents. And you can code them. Okay, here it talks about contributing to carbon reduction targets. So that's my code. And likewise, I might be reading the rest of my document and identifying other codes that talk about different aspects of sustainable construction. And then say, after looking at all these codes, I can see, okay, some of these codes I can group together. Okay, both of these, they talk about carbon related things, so carbon and energy related things. Then some other codes, they talk about waste related things. Then there can be other codes that talk about, say, life cycle cost, minimizing life cycle cost or cost efficiency, or say addressing local economic needs, so that kind of things. So I can develop themes like that, and again, by looking at those themes, I might decide, okay, some of these themes, they talk about environmental related aims. Some others, they talk about social aims. Some other themes, they talk about economic aims. So together, all of that together, they talk about aims of sustainable construction. So I have my overarching theme, my themes, and my sub-themes. So I'm organizing my codes under mainly three levels of themes. This is another example from an undergraduate research about, say, this was about involvement of foreign consultants in the Sri Lankan construction industry. So again, the main themes that she has organized her analysis under, say the types of foreign consultants, selection procedure, reasons for involvement, advantages, disadvantages, and then finally suggestions to improve the involvement. And if you take one of these, for example, reasons for involvement, so you can see the different codes that have been categorized under that particular theme. And in this table, it also shows from where these themes were identified. So she has 9 interviewees, R1 to R9. She has mentioned, okay, from which interview transcripts each of these codes were identified from. So say, for example, this first code, it was mentioned by all 9 interviewees. This particular code, fourth code, it was only mentioned by R6 and R9. So that's another idea you can use to present your thematic analysis findings. So you're showing a logical relationship between the data and your findings, where your findings came from. You can also show your findings using visual thematic maps. So, for example, say a map like this. So you have your main theme. So this is about participating in hockey. So then the identified under that, it's determined by social factors, intrapersonal factors, motivators to start, athletic identity factors, and access related factors. And then under that, there are again sub-themes. There are barriers to access, facilitators to access. And then the codes under that. So this is from an MPhil research about, again, say safety culture among raw rubber industry workers. So your themes, sub-themes, and codes there as well, showing the relationships and all those things. And then finally, you can report your results and discuss your results. So you have to systematically and logically report your results, show clear connections between the data and the results that you report. So say by using tables or like this, so you can show those links. So how your data from these individual respondents, they link with your final results. So present your content, the structure, organize your themes in a clear and understandable way. So maybe using thematic maps like this or tables like I showed you. So make sure that you present the final picture of your analysis in a clear, understandable way. So make sure to provide all the information necessary for the readers to ensure the transferability of your results, as we discussed at the beginning as well. So about, say, who your respondents were, how you did the sampling, how you selected your respondents, the background detail of your interviewees, all those things that are necessary for us to judge the relevance of your analysis. So you have to use quotations, the quotes, quoted data in a systematic, sensible way. Say only use quotations where necessary to highlight any of these themes or ideas that we come up with. So say, for example, when you're talking about this language barrier, so if there's a nice quote that you have from one of the interviewees that help you to explain how this is an issue, you can use that in the explanation of your findings. So use these quotations in a useful way, a sensible way to serve a particular purpose. So use proper academic language when writing your results, and fully describe your analysis and data collection processes. So that's about the thematic analysis process. So any questions, comments so far? I'll show you this example too. This is okay. So this is again from that exercise I mentioned, the different research methodology module about. So the exercise that they did was about experiences of online learning among postgraduate research students in the University of Morato. So here you have the interview transcripts that this person has done. So here's the coding. So she has used this table method to do the coding. You have the data on the left-hand side and the codes on the right-hand side. It's highlighted in different colors. And then say this is the collation of data. So each code, all the data that has been coded under that particular code. And then it's the theme generation. So she had generated 3 themes: benefits of online learning, challenges, and motivations, to cover the codes that she has come up with. So it's generated thematic maps for each of those themes. So each of those 3 themes: benefits, challenges, and motivations. The main theme, the sub-themes, and the codes that have been identified under each of those sub-themes. Same way for the other 2 themes as well. And this is then the write-up, brief write-up. So that's another example. Any questions?
Yeah, excuse me, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, do we need all these collective data and that method of data and tables and all with our synopsis when we are meeting our supervisors in first day?
You don't have data when you're meeting your supervisors on the first day, so you can't do your analysis.
Yeah.
You can only start your analysis after you have collected the data. So synopsis means you're still identifying the topic.
Yes.
That's the first stage. You can't start your analysis until you start collecting your data, isn't it?
Yeah. All right. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so any questions? Any other questions?
Recording stopped.
Okay, then if there are no questions, we'll stop the session there. Okay, then. Thank you very much. We'll stop there then. Thank you.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.